to welcome our speakers for today. So we've got four speakers from different aspects of the industry. So to kick us off is Helen Bailey. Helen is the founder and director at the Driven Company. Helen is also an ambassador. She also lectures at the University of Derby Centre for Mineral Products, and she's also president of the Institute of Asphalt Technology. So very, very busy woman. So we're very pleased that she's been able to join us today to talk more about carbon. Then we've got Maisie from Wienerberger, who is going to talk about her role as biodiversity manager, and in particular a specific programme that they run at one of their sites. We've got Rachel, a net zero advisor at Heidelberg Materials, who's going to talk about the commitments for Heidelberg for the future in terms of sustainability and some of their sort of success stories over the last year or so period. And then finally, we've got Suviti, who is a lecturer at UCL in London, who's going to talk about critical minerals and the life cycle, the carbon life cycle of critical minerals. So lots and lots to take in. Just to explain why we decided to have this as a topic, we'd had feedback from some of our ambassadors that this would be a topic that would be appreciated to talk about in more detail. So hopefully the aim is that you'll go away with a better understanding of some of the great work that's happening across the sector, but also we are finding that schools are asking more and more for information about sustainability and climate change and things like that. So it may just help inform you a little bit if you're going into schools and you want to touch on some of the work that we're doing around sustainability. This will give you a bit of that background to do so. So that's the main reason for two of the reasons for having this topic. So Helen, I'm going to go straight into you. So I'll stop sharing at that point and straight to you.
Okay, thanks, Hannah. Let me bring up the share screen. A big box around it. Can everybody see that? Is that coming through?
Yeah.
Yep. Magic. Okay. Right. So a bit of a whistle-stop tour of carbon and climate then this morning. Let me just get these slides moving. Sometimes they're a bit slow, aren't they, on the screen? Has that worked? Are we progressing nicely? Okay.
Yep.
A few nods. Excellent. Right. Okay. So carbon and climate, cause and effect. I think we're probably, most of us acknowledge that the climate is changing, and the climate that we live in today is not quite the same as certainly when I was born. So, 21 years ago, when our fossil fuels, were substantially less than they are now. The fossil fuels have dramatically increased the concentration of the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. And when that happens, they trap extra heat, load in the atmosphere with more moisture. It drives sort of warmer, wetter, hotter, drier, warmer, wetter winters, hotter, drier summers. We're seeing lots of change in weather patterns and a change to our general climate. And there's some facts and figures sort of floating around on the back of the emergency briefings that happened last November. So just let me throw a few at you and see what you think to these. But by 2050, 1 in 4 properties, so about 8 million homes in England, are going to be at risk of flooding. So we've got Professor Hayley Fowler, I've quoted on the slide there. Her research group is looking at all sorts of different elements of the climate, and the research group has shown that UK winter rainfall has increased by 10% since 1980 because of the fossil fuels that we're putting into the atmosphere. So that might not sound a lot, but an extra 30 millimetres of rainfall each year, or in each winter, is the equivalent of 7.3 billion cubic metres of extra water. That is quite a lot. So that's the same, just to any swimmers out there, as 3 million Olympic-sized swimming pools having an effect on flooding. And that's that trend that we're seeing is 25 years ahead of the global climate model predictions, and that's what people are starting to now get concerned about. And we could go on, I could pull out all sorts of facts and figures, but I think you kind of get the idea, and I've only got 15 minutes, so let's move on. So in 2008, we passed the Climate Change Act here in the UK, and we became one of the first countries in the world to set a legally binding emission reduction target for 2050. So lots of news broke, back in sort of 2019 when we started setting some targets. But what we found, and lots of work's gone on to say, actually, probably not going hard and fast enough on this, and we need to move a bit quicker. So a couple of years later, 2021, the UK enshrined a new target in law to slash the emissions by 78% by 2035. So let's get moving on this, because quite frankly, the clock is ticking. Okay, so there's a little bit of a sort of backstory to where we are in terms of targets. But what I really think is important, and this is the bit that we probably need to think a little bit more clearly about, is the impacts on our supply chain. So as minerals matter, we sit in this minerals value chain. So everything from mineral extraction. I work a lot in the asphalt side of the industry. We've got concrete, we've got value-added products. We buy lots of stuff from lots of places. So if there's a problem in one part of the world, it might have a knock-on effect to something that we're buying or using. So I've used this slide really. I mean, this is I think this came out of perhaps The Economist, some of the data that also sits behind this. And The Economist did a separate piece of work where they said, let's interview lots of chief execs and let's see what they think in terms of, does the climate impacts that they're seeing from events such as a Texas freeze and perhaps when we had the semiconductor shortage a couple of years ago, well, probably 5 years ago now through COVID, do chief execs see this as a problem? And actually there wasn't, maybe perhaps one out of a couple of hundred said, no, there is no problem at all. Most chief execs in the supply chain saw disruption coming as a result of climate change. So I think it's really important that we start thinking about, how does this affect what we do and where we buy from? Trying to unpick this in a short space of time is quite tricky, but I think we've also got to think about the natural capital and understanding the impacts climate can have in terms of biodiversity. The UK actually ranks in the bottom 10% of countries globally on the Biodiversity Intactness Index, with only about half of the biodiversity remaining. So across the UK, we sort of monitor wildlife populations. It's declining. It's declined by about 19% since the 1970s, and one in six of our species is now at risk of extinction. So we're feeling it in the biodiversity domain as well. So lots of facets to this, and understanding how we can stitch them together and perhaps start to have some impact is really quite a complicated thing to do. But I guess where we need to start thinking is about decoupling. And that's a word that is increasingly used, I guess, because it allows economic prosperity. So how do we keep in business, but at the same time reduce environmental pressures and impacts? So how do we decouple those two things? So keep making money, keep in business, but actually not damage the climate, the planet. And I guess what we see, I've put on this slide that it doesn't necessarily have to all be about energy. We talk a lot about reducing energy, reducing carbon, but it doesn't necessarily directly sort of affect the greenhouse gases that are related to material use. And we are big users of materials. So from an industry perspective, we need to start thinking about other mechanisms, because our materials have the ability to impact maybe 45%, according to Ellen MacArthur, in terms of global emissions. So that is a big proportion of stuff. Okay, so why is that important? Given that we're talking about the planet and Earth Day and all these other things, you may have come across Earth Overshoot Day. So this was introduced, and for anybody on this call sort of broadly, in the 50s. In your lifetime, we have seen the demand on our planet go from us needing one Earth to supply what we need to actually overshooting the Earth's supply. Okay, so we now demand more from the planet than it can give us. So if everybody, and this is a global picture that I've got on the screen, this is globally in terms of our material usage, we now need about 1.8 Earths to satisfy our, I guess, consumerism. So it's not a cheery picture, I'm afraid, for what, 10:15 on a Wednesday morning. And if we look at when we overshoot the Earth's capacity in recent years, you can see the dates on the screen. It's summer. It's not November, it's not December, it's July. And apart from the little blip on the chart that you might be able to see in 2020, it's getting earlier Yeah, so it's not a happy place. And I guess I always think of it in terms of, if this was your mobile phone, you'd all be panicked by it. We get concerned if our battery's going by lunchtime because we've had a couple of calls, but this is the planet. So we need to start thinking about what we can do. And just to sort of emphasize the point, because you might be thinking, well, do you know what? That's great, but that's global. Well, if everybody lived like us in the UK, and I'm not sure whether you can sort of read the detail on the screen, but somewhere at sort of 4 o'clock on the chart on the planet, you can perhaps see May, and it says United Kingdom, May 22nd, United Kingdom. So if everybody lived like us in the UK, we would be running out of planet and resource, I guess, by May. So next month. Fortunately, not everybody lives like us in the UK. Some are worse, some are better. So we've got Honduras in November 27th. We've got Qatar February the 4th. So on balance, that's why we say 1.8 Earths. So I guess if we were to live like us here in the UK, we would need 3 planets. If we live like the guys and girls in the US, we probably need about 5. Okay. I guess the moral of this story is we've got 1, not 3, not 5, 1. So we've got to start thinking about how we behave a little better. And just to bring it back to the industry perspective, the UK mineral sector, it's got a pretty big footprint, I guess. We're quite fundamental to quite a lot of things. So 1.5% of UK GDP, and we are essential minerals. So we all know, or a lot of us know on this call, that we touch minerals a tremendous amount of times before we even get to the office. Brushing our teeth, perhaps having paracetamol, all these other things. So that they're really fundamental to the economy. And we've got all these pressures. So supply chain expectations, some of the major contracts, net zero targets. How are we going to square this circle? Well, the future, I guess, is tomorrow. Always has been, always will be. And I think what we've got to stop doing is reinforcing yesterday, because we're quite good at that. So if we keep doing what we've always done, we'll get what we've always had. And we perhaps now need to start thinking about, how do we redefine our assets? And like it says on the screen, it's not just by their form, but I would say by the constituents. So what is in our materials? Is it calcium carbonate? Is it silica? What are we actually dealing with? So we need to start thinking about how we view things differently. We hear phrases like urban mining. Where are the materials coming from? Okay, so it's that thinking differently. And I think from an industry that serves lots of little pockets around value-added products, we've also got to start thinking about the next generation. So how many life cycles are these things going to have, and what are they going to look like? Because we can't just doing little bits and tokenistic changes and thinking, well, we'll put these products into asphalt or concrete because that gets rid of our problem. We need to make sure we're not moving it and causing a problem for the next life cycle. So we've got lots of thinking to do around this as well. So it's actually having a clear understanding of what our products are and what probably they're not. So just to wrap up, a few final sort of thoughts really around this topic. We've touched on biodiversity, we've touched on what climate is and isn't. We've got the human capital piece, because I think sometimes it's a technical challenge that we've got to deliver, but actually net zero is a people challenge, maybe you could say, disguised as a technical one, because if we can't deliver it, we don't have the people, we're never going to get there. And this was a slide that I took from a presentation. David Porter did a great job at a recent conference explaining that when they looked at membership of their department in Northern Ireland, it's aging. That profile is aging. And I guess what we need to think about is, what is our age profile in the industry, and is that bell curve shifting in the same way? Because it might be that you're losing 50% of the staff, but I would argue you're probably losing 80% of the experience. So the two are not the same. So we've got lots to think about in terms of getting that message over to the next generation through Minerals Matter. So we've got to shift our thinking from cost to value, from silos to being more collaborative, from being perhaps risk averse to a little bit more innovation enabled. We've got lots of transformation coming, and we need to be able to articulate that to the next generation. I guess the moral of the story here for me is the train has left the station, right? It's gone. So what are we doing? So I guess I'm spending a lot of time working around the sector, trying to raise awareness, provide additional education around carbon literacy. It's a recognised programme, recognised by the UN at COP21 in Paris, so that was quite a big deal in the world of sustainability. And we've been working hard through the institutes of asphalt and quarrying to really bring this message to the mineral product sector, because I think we're all a little bit carbon jargon fatigued. But actually, we're all trying to go towards targets, but do we actually understand the detail and how things fit together? You can answer that yourselves, and it's perhaps something to go away and think about. But the training really focuses on Climate Science 101, so understanding, joining of the dots, the hotspots in the mineral supply chain, how we can actually take our individual roles and make a contribution and turn ambition into action. So I think we just need to focus on, do we have an awareness? How do we all get to the same level? And how do we send that message across our teams and different parts of the workforce? And how do we then get it into STEM and make it relatable? After the training with this particular program, there's a few actions and sort of pledges so that we can actually drive measurable change in the industry. Benefits, I mean, I could go on, I won't, but engaged workforce has got to be a plus point for this. Upskilling and aligning to the future skills framework and attracting new talent to our industry, because we are doing a lot of good, but perhaps it's not well communicated. And just to show that we are actually walking the walk, as Hannah said, I sit with many hats on in the industry. We did participate in the Carbon Literacy Action Day last November. We had members of the various institutes, boards and councils. There we are, just to prove that it actually happened. We did have a picture of the presentation on the screen, but we couldn't get the lighting right. So we did do the training, I promise you. But it was a great way to actually walk the walk and start taking that message out to industry. If we're going to sort of make all of these changes, we've got to lead. So yeah, like I say, a very, very quick sort of whistle stop tour this morning. Happy to take questions at the end or talk to anybody separately, but hopefully that's given you a flavour of some thoughts and direction of travel.
Thank you, Helen. I think that was a great way to kind of set the scene about the challenges that we're facing as an industry. So I think the explanation of the earth was really, I've never heard that before, so I think that was really, really valuable. I think so it's fresh in our minds. If anyone's got any questions they want to ask now, we've kind of got 5 minutes after each presentation for questions. So you can either pop your hand up or pop in the chat if anyone has got any questions. If not, we'll move on to the next round of presentations. Oh, Brian, over to you.
Yeah, the question for Helen there is, whilst all this is very useful background stuff, aren't we really being held hostage as a part of the industry by government, because they seem to have a policy of offshoring everything? And a typical example is really the cement industry. We'll never build another cement works in the UK simply because of cost, planning restrictions and everything else. But as if I've got it right, only measure carbon emissions and so forth from the point of entry into the UK, all we've done is stop doing it in the UK. We import our cement from somewhere else in the world, so you've got their emissions to consider and the shipping costs, etc., etc. And it might make our emissions look good for the UK, but it's a false impression. And shouldn't we be lobbying for government to be more supportive of our emissions going down because of in-house development, technology, movement forward and so forth? I mean, Has Helen got any comments on that sort of broad area?
Yeah, I do, Brian. I think I'm just conscious that that is quite, well, enormous question for starters. So it's probably one to perhaps take offline, because I'm not sure we're going to solve that one during a Teams call. But yeah, you're right. I mean, there's a lot of movement. There's a lot of lobbying as well going on around the carbon border adjustment mechanisms that is specific to the bits you're talking about. But I think we've also got to start thinking about the resilience piece as well, because some of this carbon accounting and monitoring and measuring it's like cups and balls and moving it around. So if we move it we're moving from sort of scope 1s to scope 3s, and there's lots of movement in this domain as well. But I do think there's a case to be built around resilience and bringing stuff back to the UK. So I guess it depends who you talk to and at what layer of government as to which answer you might get.
Well, I mean, the two simple examples is we import millions of tons of wood chippings to go into a certain power station, and we have to subsidise it to get the energy. And what is going on? It's absolute lunacy. The second example, which is very topical at the moment, is we can't get gas out of the North Sea beds. We go and buy it from Norway that gets it out of the North Sea beds that we have the rights to. I mean, it's bonkers as far as I'm concerned. And I don't know any answers to get this message across to, and it is government that has got to make the fundamental decisions. So good luck with your lobbying.
Thank you.
It's Brian. John.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point you raised there, Brian. I think particularly about that power station you're talking about, the wood chippings, that's getting a lot more negative press in the wider media in more recent times, in my very snapshot view of it. And I think that's the only way it gets driven, really, sometimes, because politicians react to the public to some degree. Debate.
I guess I'm mindful of not derailing Hannah's schedule, so perhaps we can take that one offline.
Just got a comment in the chat. Nigel, excellent presentation. Scary what we're facing. I've worked on the university buildings at Cambridge 25 years ago. Plan to widen and update their guttering systems, because they're predicting 30% more rainfall in the next 40 years and not too far off that figure. Yeah. Brilliant. Okay. Thank you, Helen. If anyone's got any other, are you hanging on, or have you got to dash
I'll
off?
stay put, and I'm happy to take sort of questions, like I say, offline, because some of these are quite big questions. Yeah.
Yeah. We'll keep an eye on the chat, and if any of you want to reply to those, that would be great. So next, we are going to hand over to Maisie. So I'll just get the slides back up and then over to you. Is that showing up?
Thank you. Yeah, perfect. Thanks very much.
Well,
okay, let's go to the next one. Thanks. Or shall I take control? Sorry. Can't. There we go. Thank you. Yeah, so my name's Maisie McKenzie. I am the biodiversity manager at Wienerberger. So I look after anything nature, biodiversity related as part of our sustainability strategy. And today I'm going to be talking to you a bit about the kind of introduction and background to Wienerberger and the state of nature in the UK. Talk a bit about the actions that we've taken as part of our sustainability and biodiversity strategies to kind of try and bring biodiversity back into our production sites. And then I'm going to give you some examples of one of our kind of largest and most flagship sites, Ewhurst, and we can talk about some take-home actions, both big and small, that you could implement at your places of work or at your homes as well. Next slide, please. So Wienerberger are a building product manufacturer. We are based all up and down the UK. Traditionally, we were very much focused in the clay, brick and roof tile kind of sector, but in recent years, we have branched out and now kind of encompass all of those different brands that are on the screen there, which covers walls, roofs, heating, water management. And yeah, we have sites all up and down the UK. So we cover a really good broad range of different types of areas, both from like a habitat point of view, but also different communities and different ways that we can get involved. Next slide, please. Yeah, so this is just a bit of an example of the kind of whole building envelope and the different products that we manufacture, right?
Don't know if anyone else has had Maisie froze.
Yeah, it's frozen. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. I think my internet just dropped out for a moment there. Sorry, yeah, if that happens again, I will change over onto hotspotting from my phone. I think our internet's a bit dodgy today. Yeah, sorry, my personal favourite, which is Eco Habitats, which is our range of biodiversity products, so bird and bat boxes, bee bricks, all those kind of things. Next slide, please. Okay, so as the previous speaker kind of laid out, we are at a bit of an issue in terms of both climate but also biodiversity in the UK at the moment. So I know we've already touched on the fact that the UK is kind of one of the most nature depleted countries in the world, with 41% of our species declining in numbers since 1970. And a bit of a spotlight here on some species that tend to really shock people, because people do kind of consider them to kind of be quite common, or at least at one point they were quite common. So our bats have taken a real hit, have declined by over 70%. Our common pipistrelle, which is unfortunately not so common anymore, which is a huge loss. Our house sparrows, as well as swifts and starlings, are now all red list birds, and they've all fallen from between kind of 50 to 66%, which again is a really big drop. Now, the things that these species all have in common is that they're all associated with nesting in buildings. So our old homes made of stone that were very drafty with lots of holes in them and lots of crevices and cracks were great for these types of animals, and they had evolved over hundreds of years to live very closely alongside us. And as we've come into the modern age and we've started to kind of seal up our buildings and make them nice and efficient from heat saving points of view and from water ingress, unfortunately these guys have started to lose some of their homes, which is why it's so important when we are thinking about how we can bring biodiversity back into urban and developed areas, is making sure that these guys have a space to go to. So next slide, please. So in terms of Wienerberger, we have a really all-encompassing sustainability strategy that's been put together by our amazing team. So it kind of covers three of our main pillars, which is safeguarding the planet, and this is biodiversity loss, climate change, resource scarcity, innovating for the future that we want, which is where we look at how we can improve our products and our services to minimize the impact of our operations, and then moving forward together, which is taking into account how important our communities and social value is, and also our partnerships with different companies as well. Next slide, please. So within our wider sustainability strategy, we have our specific biodiversity strategy, which is Let's Build with Nature in mind. So this interfaces with nature and where we have dependencies and reliances with it, and really how we could kind of maximize improving biodiversity both across our sites but in our communities as well. Obviously, as a brick and roof tile manufacturer, we have a lot of quarry sites which historically do go hand in hand with biodiversity, with their restoration and things, but we discovered there was a lot more ways that we could interface with nature across our sites. So our kind of 5 main areas were improving our land assets, developing our products and services, which is things like eco habitats, enhancing the well-being of our people and communities. Nature and social value and biodiversity all go really closely hand in hand, and you can often improve one and also improve the other. Building partnerships and then sharing data and information. We highlighted that there was a real lack of communication and data sharing going on between private companies such as ourselves and like local authorities and local ecologists and county ecologists and record centres. So we've been making a big push to make sure that we share all of our habitat and species information And then it can go towards things like local nature recovery strategies and kind of play into those larger, more UK-wide projects. Next slide, please. So we started our biodiversity strategy by undertaking the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosures, the TNFD LEAP assessment, which is something that I would highly recommend anybody who's kind of starting out to try and think about how they could improve biodiversity or interface with nature more efficiently. And you can do it on a whole company scale, on a site scale, or on even a specific project scale. But you work through these 4 steps. So you locate your interfaces with nature. This can be through indirect interfaces like your supply chain, right through to, you know, directly taking minerals out of the ground and quarrying and the impact that that can have. Once you've located everything, you then evaluate those kind of high risk dependencies and high risk impacts. So for us, that was certain things like water scarcity. You know, we use huge amounts of water within our production processes. So especially where we have sites in the southeast of England, really need to take into account things like drought. On the other side of that, we also have flood risks on a lot of our sites. So too much water or too little water in the wrong place can cause massive issues. So you kind of go through and you rate all of those dependencies and risks and opportunities, and make sure that you're tackling both the big problems, but also any kind of like low-hanging fruit and any kind of easy fixes as part of the assessment. And then you prepare, and that's how you can report on everything. And you're sharing it with all the right people. So next slide, please. So I'm going to talk you through how we applied that LEAP assessment process on our one specific site. So this is one of our oldest sites. It's down in Surrey. It's called Ewhurst. There has been some sort of clay pit and brick manufacturing on this site for hundreds of years, going right back to like traditional handmade bricks. So it's got a really long historic and cultural kind of relevance within the local community. And it's also a very sensitive site in terms of ecology. So it's got multiple protected and notable designations. It's within the area of outstanding national beauty. We have a SSSI, a site of special scientific interest on site, which is the Smokejack clay pits, which I'll touch on a little bit more in a minute. And then we've got acres and acres of ancient woodland that we are tasked with managing. Lowland heath, you know, some really high kind of value habitats, and numerous notable and protected species, including a really amazing assemblage of reptile species, different lizards and snakes, and then lots of different protected birds. So yeah, it's a really high value site for all different reasons. Next slide, please. So for a long time, we have had a really great relationship at this site with the British Geological Society because of the SSSI Smokejack clay pits. So it's a really famous archaeological and paleontological site. So we've found really amazing fossils and specimens there of various different types of dinosaurs, some of which are now at exhibit in the National Museum in London, which is really great. And yeah, because of this kind of ongoing protection that we've always had with the clay pit for decades, the site's been managed in a very sympathetic way. Not only every time do we excavate a new area of the quarry, did the society come in and make sure that there isn't any fossils or anything of interest there. A lot of the structure of the quarry and the way that it's been built has been kind of to make sure that the ledges expose these fossils correctly. So we already had this very special management going on at the quarry, which was why and all the notable habitats and species on site really kind of sang out as to, we can really elevate this project, make it part of the wider sustainability and biodiversity strategy, and kind of really uplift what this site can do within the local community and for nature. So next slide, please. From that, we have for a long time and kind of upticked recently doing a lot of staff engagement and social impact and local outreach on this site and all our sites across the UK. So we've instated volunteering time, which allows our staff
Oh, I think you've cut out again, Maisie.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. I think I've come straight back in.
Okay.
Can only apologise about that. Yeah, so our community liaison committees, where neighbours and local businesses, people who live near the sites, can come to site, get involved. We can talk through plans of, you know, the next quarrying activities and any restoration activities. Make sure that any issues or complaints they have are dealt with. And, you know, as a very large production site, which does create mud and mess and pollution and noise, it's really important that we can kind of have those open channels of communication with our neighbours and make sure that anything we're doing, they understand why and they're happy with. So that's, yeah. Then we also have a number of different ambassador roles for our staff members. So some of these are kind of, you know, national wide projects, such as the STEM Ambassador Programme, which our social impact manager has set up running at Wienerberger, and it's going really well. And then we also have kind of in-house ambassadors. So our biodiversity ambassadors is a program we have where a few people on each site are nominated to kind of be a voice for biodiversity on their site. In the summer, they conduct surveys for me so that we have like citizen science data collection going on sites, and we can keep an eye on the types of birds and bees and things that we have on our sites. And they also get involved with habitat creation and bring ideas to me from people on the ground. We have so many sites up and down the UK, it's impossible for me to have eyes on all of them. And I do try and visit them as much as I can, but having someone who works on that site, who sees it every day, who knows the species that visit it and have a real kind of, you know, interest and love for nature has been invaluable. And I would definitely recommend, you know, find those people within your organizations who just are really keen and just who have a real natural passion for it, because they're always going to want to go above and beyond and will really work hand in hand with you. We also do a lot of things where we bring people into the site. As I say, it's really historic, and we still have a department at Ewhurst that hand make bricks in the same way that it's been, and root tiles in the same way that it's been done for thousands of years. So we have CPD days where we bring in local and national actually architects and roofers and people within the industry for them to see how the tiles are made and really get a hands-on view of that process. And then we also take part in the Heritage Open Days, where local people and children and families can come into site and again do a tour, make a tile, learn all about what a brick and tile production site looks like. And we do talks with them on biodiversity and things like that as well. And then a recent program has been to install QR codes on posts. We have quite a lot of public footpaths across Ewhurst and our other sites as well. So just having little information posts where people can scan, they can see the restoration plan. I've only got 2 slides left, so I'm hoping that won't happen again. Next one, please. Thank you. So this is some small, simple actions that we took at Ewhurst and at our other sites, and really can be done even in the tiniest of spaces. So just simple things like outdoor seating areas with planters and benches, just somewhere that our staff members can get away from the kind of hustle and bustle of production sites and the quarries and go and take a minute to be in nature. Any area of small verges or grassland or anywhere you've got, just plant wildflower seeds. It takes less management than lawns. You only have to mow it once a year. It looks really pretty in the summer and it's doing your bit for biodiversity. I think that there's a real misunderstanding of anything green is good, and that's really not the case in quite a lot of areas that are considered to be very nature friendly and natural, like the Lake District. It's actually really not normal to have just swathes and swathes of short grassland for sheep grazing off of lawns. They're actually kind of green deserts. We see a lot less biodiversity in those types of areas. So upping your species diversity, including some wildflowers and some both annual and perennial flowering species in your grass mixes that'll thrive in even the smallest corners can really help. And then species enhancements, which can be anything from putting bird boxes up on the wall to building big bug hotels out of site waste. Yeah, anywhere that we can encourage spaces for biodiversity is great. Next slide, please. And then this is our kind of bigger flagship project at Ewhurst, which is our reptile garden. So as I said before, Ewhurst has an amazing assemblage of different snakes and lizards and slow worms. And we had a small field that was overgrown with brambles and wasn't used kind of directly behind the office space. And we decided that we were going to turn this into both a space for our staff members, but also for biodiversity. So we cleared all the bramble and we've seeded it with a really nice low growing but high clover mix with lots of different food species from moths and butterflies and their caterpillars. We put a pond in, which is due to be planted now with lots of nice aquatic species, because we also have records of great crested newts on this site. We have built a hibernacular wall out of crushed aggregate that was taken from the quarry to provide basking spaces for reptiles. And then the most amazing thing happened. An artist reached out and said that she was looking to kind of take up shop somewhere and be an artist in resident and explore sculptures with clay. She'd also had some experience working with different spaces for nature, and a lot of her work is very nature informed. So she made for us these amazing sculptures which take that idea of hibernacular and just kind of elevate it. But these are all made out of clay, so that the tower has got lots of different holes in it for different bees, different mining bees and different insects like that. And then the kind of scattered is supposed to imitate where you get corrugated metal sheets laid on top of each other, but they're actually made of clay. And this provides really nice basking and warming up areas for reptiles kind of in the early morning sun. So this is what you can do with a big space, but there's no reason that you can't take any one of these kind of individual ideas and do it on a smaller scale. But yeah, this has become a really well-used space at Ewhurst. The staff use it a lot. We do tours and use it on open days. We're going to be doing an activity there with our staff members about how to manage a wildlife garden during May. So yeah, lots of exciting things to come from that project. I think that is the last slide, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, perfect. Cool. Thank you. So yeah, happy to take any questions if anybody has any.
Thanks, Maisie. It's fantastic that the range of work that's going on, and fascinating when you don't, so many of us don't work in this space every day. To find out more about these things is really great. Brian, over to you.
Oh, sorry, just on mute there.
You're just on mute, Brian.
Oh dear, yeah. Failed at the first step. No, great presentation, and it's a really good demonstration of what the industry can do in the biodiversity environmental field. My background for the last many years was with the Mineral Products Association, and I don't know whether you're liaising with them in any of these projects, but you've got tremendous common ground with the work that they do, especially in the quarries. So sharing ideas is really perhaps the message there. I've only got one minor concern, and that is, are you keeping control of the great crested newt, which is a pain in the backside to every construction project going on, I think.
Yeah, so obviously balancing, obviously we want to give protected species their space on sites, and we want to make sure that, we're protecting those populations and things. Balancing that with operational needs is sometimes an issue. So, for example, on Ewhurst itself, we've actually found the great crested newts quite often like our concrete settling tanks, where the water from the production process comes out, where it settles the sediments. Not the ideal habitat for a great crested newt is a concrete tank, but for some reason, so we've just put checks in place now where at the time of year that we get them safely into these designated spaces that we've built for them. But yeah, it's always an issue. I mean, we've had, badgers setting up camp in the middle of quarry and things like that. So we just do what we can within the legislation to make sure that they're looked after, but we can continue with our commercial works as well.
Excellent, thank you. So we'll move on, but again, if anyone's got any other questions, feel free to pop in the chat, or we can hopefully have a bit of time afterwards as well. Thank you, Maisie, that was really great. So we're going to move on now to Rachel from Heidelberg Materials. So I will hand straight over to you, Rachel. Just let me know when you want me to move on.
Thank you, Hannah. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me today. Yeah, so I'm from Heidelberg Materials. Please forgive me, I'm just getting over the tail end of a cold, so if my voice goes. I'm Net Zero Advisor at Heidelberg Materials, so I work in our sustainability team across the UK. Obviously, I focus on carbon, being the Net Zero Advisor, but I'll try and do some justice to my colleagues' area of expertise today as well. I'm just going to go through the breadth that sustainability actually covers, and how some of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals have fed into our own 2030 commitments, and then give some examples of those targets and what those projects can look like in real life, covering everything in quite high level, just to cover the breadth of topics. As Helen and Maisie have already touched on, really, that there's a lot of overlap in sustainability, and there's also a lot of areas that it covers as well. If I could have the next slide, please. So these are the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, often shortened to the SDGs. They were adopted by all United Nations member states in 2015 as a shared framework for addressing the world's biggest challenges by 2030. And there's 17 goals in total. You can see that they cover everything from climate action and responsible consumption, to education, health, equality, and peace and justice. They're covering sustainability from a social and economic perspective, as well as environmental. Don't worry, I won't go through these one by one, but I'm just brought them up to show the range that they cover. So obviously, for an industry like ours, we touch many of these goals directly and indirectly. And that's through how we make our products, how we look after our people, how we use land, water and energy, and how we support the communities around our sites. And then it's this framework that's fed into how we've developed our own UK sustainability commitments for 2030, which is what I'll come on to next. Next slide, please. So we've developed these UK sustainability commitments for 2030 that align with the United Nations SDGs. They're split into 4 pillars: net zero, safe and inclusive, circular and resilient, and nature positive. These commitments reflect the wider global group strategy, as well as taking into account the UK key drivers as well. This helps us to have clear and measurable goals to help build a more sustainable future. And then I'll just talk through each of these pillars and give examples of projects that relate to each of the pillars as well. Next slide, please. Firstly, we've got net zero. This covers all aspects of decarbonisation, and it's often what people first think of when they hear the word sustainability as well. For us, this includes reducing emissions from our own operations, developing lower carbon products, and planning for longer term solutions where emissions can't be eliminated completely, like in cement production. Some examples include the first one of reducing Scope 1 emissions per tonne by 15% from a 2016 baseline. Scope 1 emissions are all emissions that we're directly responsible for things such as burning fuels. Having a clear baseline is important when setting targets so that you can measure your progress consistently over time, and also means that you can't keep moving the goalposts as well. We also have a carbon capture and storage project planned at Padeswood, with the target to get that operational by 2028 or 2029. And obviously that's important for addressing the emissions that are inherent to cement production. And alongside that, there's targets that many of us are looking in our daily lives as well. such as transitioning transport, with a target for 100% of company cars being hybrid or electric, and 50% of vans being electric as well. Right, next slide, please. So moving on to an example of how those net zero targets translate into a real project. Criggan Asphalt's located in North Wales, and it was the first site in the UK to use hydrogen as a fuel on an asphalt burner. This picture on the right shows the first 20 tonnes that were produced at Criggan using hydrogen. Hydrogen is considered a green fuel because it doesn't produce carbon dioxide when it's combusted, so it has the potential to significantly reduce fuel emissions compared to traditional fossil fuels. Over the course of the trial, we used 4,522 kilograms of hydrogen to produce over 1,300 tonnes of asphalt. So obviously this trial went on for a few weeks, and it showed a 76% reduction in fuel emissions, which translated to a 23% reduction in the overall carbon footprint of the asphalt that was produced during the trial. Projects like this are important because they allow us to test new technologies in real conditions, and it's great to see these projects get recognised. So the picture at the bottom shows Elliot, our Carbon Innovation Manager, picking up an award for the project at the Hydrogen UK Awards earlier this year. Next slide, please. The next pillar is safe and inclusive, which focuses on people. So this covers health, safety and well-being of employees, contractors and suppliers, as well as community engagement and inclusion. Obviously, in a heavy industry like ours, safety is fundamental, and there's a number of targets in this area. One of the examples is an annual health and well-being improvement plan, which is reviewed quarterly. And we also offer a volunteering day per employee, and the targets for a year-on-year increase in uptake from that. And then also a target for 25% of women in senior roles, reflecting the need to improve diversity in parts of the business when representation has traditionally been low. As with the net zero targets, these targets are there to just give some structure and accountability. Next slide, please. Chapter 1 is a great success story that sits under our safe and inclusive commitments. So we've partnered with Chapter 1 since 2022 to support children's literacy and reading confidence. The programme is one-to-one online reading sessions. So employees from Heidelberg Materials volunteer up to 30 minutes a week to read with children in primary schools around the UK. We now have over 60 volunteers involved, working with children throughout the school year. And the focus is on basic literacy skills, things like fluency, comprehension and phonics, but also helping children actually enjoy reading and feeling more confident as well. We're a gold partner of Chapter 1, and we also run an annual children's book competition linked to our industry, with people competing around the business to write a story based around our industry. The winning book is made available through Chapter 1's online library, which schools, families and children are able to access for free. And the picture on the right shows Jops, our social value and fair coordinator, at the Chapter 1 Awards event. Next slide, please. The next commitment is Nature Positive. This focuses on biodiversity and water, and particularly on how we manage land and natural resource use across our sites. Obviously, given the nature of our operations, and especially in quarrying, this is a really important area. So some of the example targets: each active quarry is required to designate at least 15% of its land for nature. So this could include habitats for wildlife, restoration areas, biodiversity projects. We also have a target to reduce freshwater consumption by 10% from a 2018 baseline. Again, the baseline matters, given that fixed reference point so that we can properly track reductions over time. And then where we have operational sites within 1 kilometre of a protected area, a biodiversity management plan must be in place. Next slide, please. The Quarry Life Awards, an example for something under our Nature Positive commitment. They're a global biodiversity competition that's run every 3 years, I think, by Heidelberg. The contest aims to raise awareness of the biodiversity value of quarrying sites, and also gives the opportunity to share new best practices with the scientific community, with local authorities, and with other operating units as well. The programme runs across more than 15 countries, and it's got 2 main streams. So the first one's focused on research, and the second one focused on more community-led projects. So again, you can see, although there's 4 pillars, the projects rarely sit into just one, and there's often a lot of overlap in different areas of sustainability with benefits more than what you can initially first think of. The aim is to support the practical work to improve biodiversity, restoring habitat, and also the engagement locally to the sites. And there's a prize fund of over £250,000. The UK winners go on to compete at an international level. And in the UK, the Quarry Life Law Awards have been recognised externally. So they've won an award of their own. And the picture on the right shows the team collecting a gold UK Green Apple Award in 2025. And the picture at the bottom shows, I think, this year's winners, this year's finalists of the Quarry Life Awards. Next slide, please. The final commitment is circular and resilient. So this focuses on how we can use materials and resources, reduce waste, increase reuse, and designing processes that are more efficient over the longer term. A lot of this is about keeping materials in use for as long as possible, rather than relying on virgin resources or sending waste to landfill. Some of the example targets are achieving 50% of gross revenue from sustainable products, so that's those that are either low carbon or circular. We've got a target for 0 non-production waste to landfill, and there's a specific ambition to process 9 million tonnes of recycled aggregates each year. Next slide, please. This project is a good example for circular and resilient in practice. So it's a 10-mile resurfacing scheme on the A47 that was delivered with National Highways. The focus was on reuse rather than removing and replacing material. So existing road materials were recycled in situ and used to form a binder course with over 90% recycled content. And in total, more than 13,000 tonnes of recycled material were kept in the system, including around 2,400 tonnes of tar-bound material that would normally have been taken off-site and sent to specialist landfill. But a mobile recycling and cold mix process was also used that was able to be situated near to sites and reduced both transport movements and energy use. So that resulted in a carbon saving of over 400 tonnes of CO2 equivalent across the scheme. So again, a win across multiple pillars. Next slide, please. Yeah, that's me. So thank you for your time. Hopefully we've shown how sustainability covers a wide range of topics and that it needs to be handled in a structured way. Thank you for listening, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Rachel. Again, fascinating to see how much work goes into these initiatives. So thank you for sharing, some of your success stories. I think it's really important that we share when great work like this is happening. So thank you. Any immediate questions? I was hoping you'd pop your hand up again.
Yeah, I've remembered to take the mute off this time. Were you expecting me to comment?
Well, I just it's nice. It's nice when we get a question. So
well,
I'm pleased
I know.
that you're
I've been on the receiving end, so I know how important it is to speakers to get reaction. No, again, interesting. And my particular area of interest, if you like, is recycled aggregates and the like. And that last slide about the A45 was obviously pertinent to that. In the UK, we're sort of nationally hitting around about 30% of recycled aggregates meeting the demand, which is the best position in Europe, as far as I understand it at the moment. And with the asphalt side that you were particularly talking about there, you're very well placed for that to go straight back into the asphalt that you're going to use fresh again. One of the things that always concerns me with this area is the difficulties the industry has with the regulations, in that I think I'm right in saying that if you was to take that asphalt material off-site, you would then be into waste regulatory territory rather than keeping it on-site and reprocessing and back in the on the highway. So you've obviously, wherever possible, are cracking that problem.
Yeah, I'm really sorry. This is not my area of expertise. I know it was a mobile plant that was brought
construction. So
Oh,
I couldn't hear. You were breaking up.
Apologies.
You've disappeared.
I thought it was going to be my voice, not my Wi-Fi that gave out. So yes, apologies. This isn't my area of expertise, but I knew it was a mobile plant. But it's something that I'm sure we could pick up with some of my colleagues that are much more well versed in this area.
Yeah, it's a perennial problem, and all the companies that are trying to recycle and increase their recycled aggregate content are faced with these problems.
Thanks, Brian. So yeah, if you want to pick that up offline, that'd be great. Okay, well, I'm pleased that we are to time. So Suvi, you've got your allotted time for your presentation. So we're going to go straight into that, and then hopefully if we've got sort of 5 or 10 minutes at the end for any last questions or comments, that'd be great. So I will hand straight over to you. Just let me know when you want to swap the slides.
Thank you, Helen. Hi everyone. Pleasure to be here. So my name is Suvi, you can call me Suvi, and I'm a lecturer at the University College London. My research expertise is actually not in the mining sector. It's primarily in the methodology, which is life cycle assessment. And I've primarily applied this to sustainable resources. So think more waste management, plastic supply chains, and now more recently transitioning into applying this to the mineral and mining space as well. Next slide, Hannah, please. So just a little bit about the program that I'm lecturing on. It's an MSc in Global Management of Natural Resources in the Chemical Engineering Department at UCL. And we run essentially a very broad kind of MSc to provide both technical and non-technical interdisciplinary kind of knowledge to students on these master's programs. So we have 6 months where they stay in London, and then 6 months we send them to Australia for a pretty intensive research project at the end of the master's program. So yeah, next slide, Hannah. So I would have loved to actually give some context generally on, the critical mineral space, the increasing demand, the increasing extraction, and the sort of future needs within that space as well. But I think we're all pretty well aware of it, especially with Helen's lecture. at the very start, Helen's talk at the very start. But instead, I thought I'd start with the importance of actually quantifying environmental impacts. So for those of you who have not come across this image before, this is an image that, or research that was done by a research group from Stockholm Resilience Center. And essentially what they tried to do since, way back in 2009, they have tried to assess the kind of planetary boundaries that keep, or the Earth system processes that together sort of keep the planet in a very stable state. And every so often, they try and understand whether we have transgressed some of these safe operating spaces, as they call it. This is the most recent result of that from 2025, which shows us that out of 9 of these sort of planetary, core Earth system processes, we have already transgressed 7 of those. And transgression in this sense is essentially entering a territory where the kind of risk and uncertainty is beyond what we can really, model accurately or understand in a meaningful way. So this is, I think, a really good resource also from the teaching perspective to conceptualize, the kind of scale of environmental impacts that we're facing. Now, the mining sector in specific is actually, is not removed from impacting some of these planetary boundaries or adding to the transgression. So mining does sit, in at least, or impacts at least 4 or 5 of these different planetary boundaries as well. Now, this framework, of course, names the pressures and gives us a good understanding of the kind of systems that we're dealing with, but it does not allow us to actually diagnose at a scale where, real decisions are being made. And this is where, next slide, Anna, please. And this is where the methodology of life cycle assessment comes in. So it's a scientific method, a standardized method that allows us to really quantify the environmental impacts across an entire supply chain or a life cycle of a product or a process. And this allows us to kind of understand where impacts might lie and what sort of impacts might lie across the entire life cycle. So other, really important aspects of this methodology is that we don't just assess carbon dioxide emissions or carbon impacts. We look at 13 to 18 different, depending on what kind of method you use, different impact categories. So that is a really core part of these sort of methodologies is giving sort of equal weight or allowing us to also probe where trade-offs might exist. If you have a process that is reducing carbon emissions, is it increasing impacts elsewhere in the system, in the environmental system? And as I said, this is a standardized methodology, so it allows, it's auditable and reproducible, which is quite helpful for a methodology like this. Next slide, Hannah, please. So just wanted to give you a brief overview because this talk, I think, is focusing a little bit more on the methodology itself, an introduction to the methodology, and then we'll look at how it applies to a specific case study as well, just to contextualize it a little bit. But essentially, this is what the ISO standard dictates. So we have to start with kind of, understanding the purpose of the study. And there's a few technicalities in this bit, which is trying to understand what the boundaries of the system are, right? So this is what we call the system boundary. Are you assessing a specific plant? Are you assessing an entire supply chain? Are you assessing the manufacturing stage? That's really crucial to understand, to question at the outset. The next kind of technicality is a functional unit. So LCA really becomes operational when you are measuring relative to something else. It's really useful when you're trying to compare different systems. So that's why it's, very, very beneficial when you're trying to make a decision. based on environmental impacts. And this is where the functional unit comes into play. And this is essentially a sort of normalization that occurs. So we try and understand what is the consistent function between two comparative systems that we can compare them systematically. The next stage is the real data intensive stage. This is where we build the inventory of the life cycle. So if you look at the system boundary diagram on the right, this is the stage where we collect at every single part of the life cycle you've decided to assess. We try and understand all the material and energy inputs and all the waste outputs, product outputs, and emission outputs. So really, really crucial aspect of this phase. The next part is converting those inventories into actual impact indicators. And then finally, we have, results that we can interpret. We can understand where the hotspots of a system lie, test our assumptions. This is all in the interpretation phase. Next slide, please. So this is just to give you an idea of what LCA measures beyond carbon, right? So this is one such impact method. We have 18 different impact categories that we would be assessing at the midpoint. And you can kind of collapse those impact categories into essentially endpoint indicators, we call them. So broadly, what are the damages to human health, ecosystem, and resource availability? Next slide, please. So a lot of people know about LCA, but I think what's really interesting is how we develop, how we go from a specific emission, a specific molecule to actual impacts. And these are the sorts of cause and effect models that sit behind LCA that make it quite, scientific and rigorous. So these are just two examples out of, 18 different categories that you might have. You have global warming potential that we're all pretty familiar with. And you can start by what sits at the backdrop of this is essentially climate models, trying to understand what the effect of 1 kg of CO2 is on radiative forcing and therefore on increases in temperature change. And this is similarly done for all the different impact categories. So it's really bringing together, climate models, toxicology models, ecosystem models, to develop the characterization of emissions into the final impacts. Next slide, please. So I want to go through quickly a case study of how LCA can be applied to the mining sector, and specifically looking at how your decisions or the choices that you make in an LCA and the sorts of nuances that can affect the results of an LCA, right? And I think from the teaching perspective, it's important to kind of probe the numbers that we see in like headline reports, etc. So this is really giving you an example of that. So let's start with a lithium supply chain. So we'll just be probing lithium that's being extracted from both brine sources and hard rock. And this initial system boundary that you see here comparing these two systems is just, the producer, the extraction process. The functional unit that you see coming out of the two different processes is 1 kg of lithium carbonate. So this is a consistent kind of product that we fix as our functional unit in order to compare these two systems. You can see all the inputs and outputs at every different stage as well. So that's the inventory process that we were talking about. Next stage, please. Next slide, please. So then we can expand the system boundary, right? So we can make the choice of not just looking at the extraction processes. We can expand to also consider how this battery grade lithium is then processed into a battery pack. And we can then compare the entire life cycle of the battery pack coming from brine or from lithium source from brine or lithium source from hard rock. And you can see here how the functional unit now has changed. Now we're comparing it on the basis of a battery pack as opposed to a battery grade lithium carbonate intermediate. Next slide, please. So I just want to walk you through some sorts of different results, right? So this is a study that looked at this entire battery supply chain. Now they compared two different types of battery chemistry here, which you see LFP and LMO, and then they compared the different extraction processes to source a battery-grade lithium carbonate as well. Now, they did this for different impact categories, so very data, heavy process. So we're just showing here your global warming and your acidification impacts. And what you see right off the bat is that when you expand the system boundary further, the actual extraction process matters less than the choice of your battery chemistry in this regard. But another thing to notice is that in both instances, with both battery chemistries, hard rock tends to have more impacts than your brine processes. And that's because it's really energy intensive. You heat, you decrepate the spodumene to really high temperatures. So that's where the kind of impacts are compared to just solar evaporation in the brine context. Next slide, please. And then I want to, I don't know why the slides have shifted quite a bit, but then we can probe, one specific extraction process. So in this case, we're looking at a study that looked at both the brine route and the spodumene route, and they assessed, so we already, asserted that, the brine route tends to be less environmentally impactful. But when you start probing specific aspects of the process, for example, the O grade, you begin to see that these results in the ranking can really shift. So this study looked at how at lower grades of the brine processing route compared to a lower grade of the spodumene route, you actually have a reversal of the ranking. So a lower grade brine route will have a higher climate change impact than its counterpart in the spodumene extractive route. Next slide, please. And then finally, a third kind of methodological aspect I wanted to highlight is also the choice of where you get this data from. Has a massive impact on your life cycle assessment results. So here we're looking at a study that got direct inventory data from very site-specific processes. And you can see here that there's large variation, even if they're using the same technology, on the climate change impact. And there's several reasons for this. One of them, very, very simple reason, which you see here with Atacama versus Chari, which is in China, is related to the electricity grid mix. So the Chari process here is not exactly solar evaporation. It actually is looking at a waste from a potassium refinery that they're then processing and then solar evaporating. So that initial processing of that waste residues is what causes, with a higher electricity consumption, is what causes the higher impact in this situation. But we can also look at, other impact categories like water scarcity and water consumption. Water consumption does not give us a full picture of what the kind of scarcity or how what kind of water scarcity results it entails. So in this, we see that Atacama has a lower water consumption, but a higher water scarcity as a result of the kind of scarcity of water in that region. So just to give us a perspective of how, depending on the choices you make in a life cycle assessment study, you can have, very vastly different numbers. Next slide, please. I'm wary of going over. So this is kind of just a taster of how an LCA would look at the mineral sector or the extraction processes, and the sorts of decisions that can impact the LCA studies as well. So things that do matter is where this where is this study being done? What is the level, the data quality of the inventory data? What sorts of choices are you making in the methodology? And also, what are the kinds of environmental impact trade-offs that might exist? So are you replacing lower carbon emissions for impacts in some other sphere? Next slide, please. And I just wanted to translate this into, again, something to take into the classroom is, life cycle assessment is becoming a lot more commonly used across different sectors. And it is, as I've just shown you, really easy to, I guess, to take it at face value, when in reality, a lot of critical analysis needs to go into a specific, LCA result. So when, something you could take into the classroom is, how do you actually question or probe a sustainability claim? And I think some important questions are, what is the functional unit? How exactly have these systems been compared? What is the boundary that specific study was looking at? Where is this data coming from? And aside from carbon dioxide, what other impacts have shifted as a result of the change or the decision? So yeah, that's me. Happy to take any questions, and happy to also get in touch for any research collaborations on similar topics or applying this methodology to other systems.
Thanks, Suvi. Some great information there, and I think useful to hear from an academic perspective as well. So that's great, and we'll certainly include you in the email to follow up, so people can get in touch with you directly. Just got a couple of minutes for any final questions before we wrap up for the morning. Diana.
Hello. Oh, sorry, my camera. I know. Thank you very much for the presentation, Suviti. I want to ask you something. I am using in my PhD research now the same methodology, but focus in social life cycle assessment. So basically, when we try to analyze the framework and the methodology from social impacts, we find many challenges because social impacts are a little more quality. So instead to quantity, compared, for example, to emissions. So according to your experience, what strategies or recommendations you can give me, try to figure out a little bit these social impacts into this methodology, because for social life cycle assessment, take the same step of the methodology. So thank you very much for your advice.
Thank you. Thank you for your question, Diana. I personally have not used the social impact assessment databases, but I'm familiar with the methodology. I think with social assessment, like with LCA, being extremely clear of the assumptions that you're making and being very aware of, testing, sensitivities as much as possible as well. And I think with social life cycle assessment, like you said, it's more of a qualitative field. So it makes sense to work with the social scientists when you are, setting up surveys or collecting data through interviews. It's really important, I think, to have someone who understands how to do that well, instead of, trying to do that ourselves, because it's not our space. I hope that's helpful. Feel free to connect with me and we can discuss further.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you to all our speakers for your time in the presentations and also with us today. I hope you'll all agree that it's been sort of hugely informative, a lot of stuff that I didn't realise went on across the sector. So hopefully you can take that information and use it in various ways. Just a reminder about our next meeting, which is on Thursday, the 23rd of July, same time as today's, and the focus for that session will be about engaging with teachers and also how we can link outreach activities with the curriculum. So I'm sure we'll probably have 1 or 2 speakers available for that session as well. So we'll send more information about that later on in the spring. And we will circulate a PDF version of the slides. There won't be Helen's slides in there, but if anyone would like to reach out to Helen to find out more about her work in carbon literacy, then please do so. And we'll also share a recording to the session on YouTube when that's available, so you can share it with colleagues as well. But yeah, great. Thank you for your time, and we'll be in touch with lots more Minerals Matter information soon, I'm sure.
Thank you. Bye.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Thank you.